So something extraordinary is seemingly happening inside NATO. For the first time since the Cold War, the biggest security alliance in the world is seriously weighing up whether or not its pilots should be allowed to open fire on Russian aircraft. But here's the kicker: not in Ukraine, over Europe itself. Simultaneously, Putin continues to pile on the pressure through hybrid, grey zone means, making some wonder perhaps the West's best response to Russian hybrid warfare is its own. Indeed, the US, the UK, and France all have offensive cyber capabilities. So presumably they exist for a reason. With that in mind, in this video, I wanted to break down three key areas. Firstly, what is actually happening with these latest developments? The surge in Russian attacks that's testing NATO's limits and making it consider these radical proposals. But second, why this matters, how these provocations are pushing Europe and NATO toward a new era of offensive deterrence. And finally, how it could unfold, what happens next, what NATO might do, what that would mean for Putin, for Europe, let alone America, and the overall balance of power in mind of Ukraine.
This is the Global Gambit.
How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the channel where we are returning to NATO, Ukraine, Russia, and the broader situation. Because right now, across Europe, warnings are getting louder. Alarmism is growing. Germany's Merz has said that we are no longer at war, but we are no longer at peace with the Kremlin either. Denmark's Med Frederiksen has warned that we are now in the most difficult situation in Europe since the end of the Second World War. And Britain's former intelligence chief, Eliza Manningham-Buller, has mused that, well, we may already actually be at war with Moscow. Now, these remarks reflect a growing sense of panic over Moscow's grey zone aggression, a campaign of hybrid warfare that's testing the limits of NATO's restraint, unity, and willingness to actually act on what it says. But what do you think? I'm curious whether or not these latest set of events are something to actually take notice of, or yet more just war of words. We've covered a lot of this in the past couple of weeks, but I want to hear, as always, what you have to say. Indeed, though, drones one day, cyber attacks the next, sabotage on the third, shadow fleets being used to tamper and to interfere. Across Poland, Estonia, and even as far as Denmark and Germany now, these Russian operations, incursions, attacks, assaults, manipulations, provocations, whatever word you want to use, have forced airports to close, military air defences to scramble, and policymakers and leaders alike to reconsider what the hell they are doing. Indeed, this isn't open warfare. This is what analysts, of course, call hybrid warfare, a rather nebulous term that gets more and more used in international relations and strategic studies. But a deliberate strategy of disruption designed to erode your enemy, or in this case, Western unity, all the same. But as the provocations mount, indeed, NATO is being forced to ask, how long can it afford to hold its fire? The debate inside NATO, which is according to multiple officials now, is that frontline states, backed by France and the UK, are openly pushing for a more forceful response. These talks were prompted by a wave of hybrid assaults across Europe, arson attacks, a suspected Russian sabotage plots, even a foiled attempt to target Rheinmetall's CEO, Germany's largest arms manufacturer. And all of that after the interferences with local elections and, of course, the air events over Poland and the Baltics. So these proposals are nothing short of striking, arming surveillance drones that currently only collect intelligence, lowering the thresholds for pilots patrolling eastern flank borders to actually engage hostile aircraft, conducting live military exercises right up against Russia's frontiers in areas that Moscow has long viewed as off limits. But heck, if they can do it with the Zadar operations between Belarus, well, then the NATO argument is, what's the difference for us? So as one NATO diplomat has put it, these are active discussions on how to better and more efficiently respond to Russia. In short, the alliance is genuinely, it looks like, trying to impose real costs on hybrid warfare, but without still directly escalating into conflict. A delicate balancing act, but clearly something that indicates to people inside NATO something has to shift, because if they remain passive, inert, well, Putin will continue to take advantage. As I've said before, many times before, Putin only responds to force, to strength. And the reason that he's undertaking these incursions, provocations, whatever word, into the eastern borders is because he knows he can get away with it at the moment. He's getting desperate because the war in Ukraine is not going well, and so he pursues these extremist measures. Of course, though, then last month there came Donald Trump's remark that NATO should open fire on Russian aircraft that breach Allied airspace. It shocked European diplomats, but it also captured a deeper frustration amongst allies who see Putin's hybrid war as both relentless and unpunished. Indeed, the US ambassador to NATO has said he's working every day to improve the alliance's options for hybrid warfare, stressing the need for enough rungs on the escalation ladder. Translation: give Moscow something to fear before the situation actually spirals out of control. And so, if it weren't already clear why this matters, well, if these new proposals were adopted, it would mark the most significant shift in NATO's posture since Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Because for over 3 years now, the alliance has largely relied on deterrence through presence, air patrol, surveillance, and of course sanctions. But Russia's escalating hybrid attacks, which has really stepped up in the past quarter, from drones to cyber intrusions, really are testing the credibility and patience of that approach. Hybrid warfare blurs the boundary between peace and war. Therefore, should it be treated as an alternative to conventional warfare, or as a prelude to it? That is a question that divides policymakers not merely across war zones that are afflicting regions like Europe, but everywhere. Academics across the world have long debated what defines hybrid warfare. Where are the guardrails? And well, Putin seems to be absolutely exploiting that. One camp argues that Russia's resort to hybrid tactics, of course, shows weakness. I strongly believe so. Ukrainian drone strikes have crippled much of Russia's oil refineries, has undermined its complete economy, and making it more and more dependent on external entities. Hybrid attacks in this reading are therefore the actions of a frustrated regime lashing out between the thresholds beneath the thresholds of an open war. That being said, others do see it slightly differently. It's a deliberate test of NATO's will. Each provocation, each unidentified drone or accidental airspace violation probes for division. If the West does not respond decisively, Putin may conclude that NATO's deterrence is a bluff. Now, whilst you might have argued in earlier years that that might have been the case, the occasional flyby of Russian aircraft over, say, British airspace, but over the past few years, let alone the war itself in Ukraine, it's no longer a case of provocation, a test. This is a genuine, I think, person who's up against the wall. Putin's back is up against the wall. And this is more than just probing at this point. This is more aggressive than that. This is more assertive than that, or more desperate than that. But again, I ask you, what do you think? Is this just probing, which I feel is a little bit of an outdated term by some of the Western media, or is it a reckless, reactive measure by the Kremlin because they're running out of options, both at home and abroad? Let me know in the comments. Now, as this happens, the EU itself is also recalibrating. The EU, separate from NATO, is planning its own countermeasures, restricting the movement of Russian diplomats accused of espionage, funding anti-drone defences, and bolstering critical infrastructure. Von der Leyen has put it that this is a deliberate and targeted grey zone campaign against Europe, and so we must not only react, we must deter. But of course, unity is fragile. What's just happened in the Czechia, what's happening across other parts of Eastern Europe, efforts to create an EU-wide drone wall, for example, remain mired in debate. And all the time, Moscow watches closely, because every delay sends a message or an opportunity. So in the bigger picture, Europe's security is shifting from reaction to prevention, from watching to warning, from inaction to action, we hope. The question is how far NATO is willing to go, aside from other entities like individual countries or the EU. For now, the alliance itself is debating whether to treat hybrid warfare as war itself. It's a very difficult one, If NATO responds too softly, it risks normalizing even more Russian provocations. But respond too forcefully, say by authorizing the downing of Russian aircraft, and it risks triggering a very awkward confrontation that, will be hard to walk back from. Another point I always emphasize is it's very easy to start, but once you start, how easy is it to end or to prevent? The ultimate danger is therefore an accident. What if a Russian sabotage plot causes mass casualties, say a parcel bomb aboard a commercial airliner? That could turn grey zone conflict into full-scale overnight war. Every rung on the so-called escalation ladder means more risks of its own. Misreading radar data, overreacting to an unidentified drone, miscalculating Moscow's next move. Some allies urge caution more towards the western part of Europe because Russia remains a nuclear power. And so the fear isn't just conflict, it's miscommunication. A split-second decision could turn a broader provocation into some full-scale confrontation. But there's an equal danger in hesitation. If NATO's response is too timid, Putin may come off to believe that Europe's collective defense clause is meaningless. That perception, not a missile or a drone, is what could fatally weaken the alliance. And we all know from history what appeasement has done for war. So Putin's strategy relies always on plausible deniability, on ambiguity, pushing just far enough to keep the West divided and hesitant. NATO's challenge now, as it really has always been, is to craft a deterrent that's firm enough to impose costs, but cautious enough or clever enough to avoid catastrophe. Whether the alliance maintains unity or fractures under the pressure will define the next phase of this standoff, but also be the direction of the alliance for many years. Because this isn't just about drones or the airspace. It's about whether Europe can finally draw a line that Putin dares to cross. And most importantly, for Europe's own sake, not dependent on the United States or anybody else. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then do consider giving it a like and subscribing, as I do try to cover as much of Europe as possible. I am half Russian, I am half English, my name is Pyotr Kurzin. I've been, educated in strategic studies, economics and international relations in the UK, in Europe, and in the United States, but with a desire to understand and build the bridges of understanding between Russian or Slavic perspectives and Western perspectives, which is not really something that's very common on YouTube or anywhere else on social media. So if that resonates with you, then again, do consider joining the community by clicking that subscribe button and seeing more videos in the future, such as this one here. Take care.